So, do we want to bring it? Hold on.
Well, can you?
What's wrong with this one? There it goes. Do we want to bring the panelists up here and have one last round of Q&A? I like the lineup we've been doing this weekend. Yeah. It did look like that at one point. I said, you know, I thought when I saw you, who's going to be So, Al, we're going to have
Good. Pristine.
Yeah. Questions from, yes, Jesse.
Well, I guess going to the last Lance's relation of meaning between the symbol and the subject of the symbol. I think language requires for reliability for the subject of the symbol to be common, observable throughout the culture, so that the meanings of the members of the culture either coincide or complement each other. And have a difference that is meaningful. And as regards to our present language culture falling apart, I think that's one of the main causes that our symbols don't refer to the same things. And as in the conspiracy theory world, and now there's evidence of misinformation that's generally by some, and I think confused and horrifies everyone else. I guess that's a comment.
Yeah, I don't hear it's not a question.
And the question is, with AI, since its purpose is to accelerate an economic system that's already far into the process of destroying our habitat, what do we do with it?
Sure. Well, I think AI is like a whetstone, a sharpening stone for like the blade of capitalism that sort of puts so. But I do that. Yeah, it's like I think having limits to that makes sense.
Well, I guess maybe
Laura, do you want to say something?
would it ever be possible for humans to say that?
Well, I think AI is not destroying our way of communication. I would say that AI is reconstructing another way of communication. So I think it is important to adapt our communication to the new technologies and then create new habits. Yes.
I mean, I'll just say McLuhan had the point that all our technologies are extensions of ourselves, and that's an amplification. So if we're amplifying ourselves, in both good and bad ways, that is the concern, because when we're bad, we're very, very bad. And that often has disastrous effects that the good does not compensate for. At least that's the concern. I don't.
Just a person that was in business. There are a lot of good people out there trying to do things. They're trying to solve real problems. And clearly there's a lot of dangers and a lot of things that are unintended consequences that have got us in a lot of trouble. But there is also promise. This technology can be helpful if used in the correct ways. Like I say, it's a tool, and it's up to us to learn how to control it, to use it the best we can. So hopefully when we can do it, we can get out in front of it. And we can try to change a course, be in a positive direction before it gets to it.
And H.G. Wells long ago said, we're in a race between, with with catastrophe, and then Buckminster Fuller, it's utopia or oblivion, and it just seems like we're at extremes.
Check it.
I have a question for Gabriel. I'm a little concerned about your sister, Mia.
I'll tell her that you asked about her. Yeah, she's a musician. She's okay, but that was probably not the worst thing that we've done together. Actually,
It's a good thing you didn't go too far with all that.
Yeah, no, we made an alien movie
Drain the
once.
body and things
That was
like
much
that.
worse than that. So, but I made a lot of films as a kid. I mean, I think like my evolution of media. I started with video. Video was big in the '80s when I was growing up, and now it's AI. I mean, I work with AI as well. And I teach AI at NYU, which is an interesting thing to do. So yeah.
A good lesson for what kids do if they don't have screens.
Yeah, I mean,
They have to be creative.
yeah. I mean, but technology is a way to be creative too, I think, in a lot of ways. I teach technology in New Orleans to artists that don't use technology in their work at all. And people discover whole different parts of themselves when they work with tech. And that's what happened with me with video. So it's a communication device. I think that's the problem, is maybe now people are too obsessed with the fetishization of technology and not with the idea that it's all about communication with each other. And so it's blocked off this wall of how do we actually communicate with technology.
Just to think about AI, there are some interesting books that, it's mainly algorithms and statistics. So that's what we got to remember. It's, and that's why you really have to watch it, because like, I know when I first started using it, I was doing some work and I was looking for some references, and I had it give me some references, and it's a good thing I looked them up, because they made them all up to make up what would please what I was after. But it came up with something that didn't exist. In fact, one of the books I read listed a situation where a lawyer did that. A lawyer was having some kind of environmental case, and they went to AI to find cases to support their case. And unfortunately, they didn't check it, and they went to court with that. And they really got slapped down by the judge and got penalized because they didn't check the resource, check the references. So it can be useful, but you got to check it. You can't just take what you get.
And they're now down at the bottom of the sea with the other side.
I really was thinking of Shinkalu's talk about the resources that go into just a simple query to ChatGPT or something like that, right? And also, like, reminding me of all the externalities that come from capitalism, right? Something that seems cheap and arrives at your home seems of utility, but out of mind, out of sight are the larger implications of where things come from. And so also something that came up yesterday was this idea of building a better bomb and the implications and the responsibility from that. And it reminds me, there was a story about, we're all familiar maybe with the atomic football, the nuclear football, the modified Zero Halliburton briefcase that the president carries, that has the launch codes for the atomic arsenal of the United States. It's a series of codes, transponder, and this sort of thing. But there was an alternative design to it. To actually put the launch codes inside of a living human being. And then the president would have to physically kill another human being in his proximity in order to launch this. So we do have design affordances that can be put in place.
Well, we're talking about hereafter.
You had this thing he said where, you asked, will computer ever think like people do, and query the computer that, so a person asks the computer, will you ever think like a person does? And the computer responds, that reminds me of a story.
Can they really tell the same stories we have? Do they have the same experiences? That stories come from within us? What's within them? Does it really belong to them? Or they borrowed the ideas from somewhere else? Are they creating things up? Again, the storytelling animal, and can there be another animal like it?
Gee, yeah.
I guess my question is for Matt, but perhaps for a storyteller also. Climate science has been pretty clear for a long time now, and yet this has not scientists have not been able to translate that into actual political action for the most part. And so from an artist's perspective or a storyteller's perspective, is there another language that could be exploited to sort of trigger these changes which are not happening as it is?
I had a conversation with our son, who is he does environmental work. I can't remember the name of his job, it's something technical. But he works for an environmental company, he does the research and work. And we were talking about it because I had noticed there was this engagement between, and I had seen some workshops and I had seen some discussion from storytellers about connecting with people who are interested in the environment, people who are interested in teaching science. I mean, to make it even broader, not just environmental. And there are teachers who are trying to learn how to do science and story, and my father was one of them. He was actually, even though he had a master's in psychology that came later, he had a master's in botany. And the reason he studied psychology was because he wanted to understand how people learned. He wanted to help his students. And so he told stories throughout in teaching science and getting people to identify with science. My sister teaches chemistry. Same thing. She uses stories oftentimes to connect them with principles. She uses other techniques too. But the fact that we have scientists who have engaged with those who are wanting to have a better resounding message, a message that makes sense, they started looking to story. Business has done that. I saw that happen. We didn't have the same attention to story and storytelling in the 90s, in the 80s, late 80s when I started, in the 90s when I was very, very active in storytelling. We saw that come in the early 2000s, after the turn of the century, but that sounds a long time ago, doesn't it? So anyway, yes, there are those who are and who have found that, and that's where you'll see some movement and some, how can we turn our information into stories?
So I think decentralizing the human from this, maybe less critical thinking or critical imaginary, and thinking about the perspective of objects, the more than human kind of community of the world that is all too often sort of receiving the sort of externalities of our extraction and our runaway kind of dipshit greed, I think. So I think trying to decenter the human from some of these stories, as a consequence of our physiology, maybe we think that we're the center of everything, right, in the story, and approaching it from that, sort of navel-gazing, subconscious bags of water, and maybe trying to include a larger kind of system of objects, which you're also alluded to, like the different belief systems and looking at that. But I think that sort of line from 68, be realistic, demand the impossible, I think is really important. The difference between critical thinking and critical imaginary, I think, is a way to situate not just artists and designers, maybe more like part of the conversation, but also decenter the human from the system of the property.
Yeah, I just want to add, because this relates to the Korzybski lecture, Marianne talking about reading, but reading narrative particularly and its relation to empathy and theory of mind, and that theory of mind was developed or has something to do with autism having a deficit in that, and that individuals with autism tend to not relate to narrative. And it seems like there's something going on in our culture where we don't really relate to narrative in the same way as well. And we use the word narrative as when we're really not talking about an actual story. And I even see people like in PR talking about, you gotta get a narrative, and they're not talking about how to make a story. They're talking just like get anecdotes from your audience, from your customers, something like that. So really, studying narrative and studying storytelling is something that is really we really need, and that people are not looking into how, what's the structure of narrative, how does it work, how do you become how do you become a good storyteller?
I asked my dad how long I'd been telling stories because I was trying to figure it out. He said, since you could talk. So some of us got in trouble at school and it turned it into a profession. But there are a lot of books and information now on how to do storytelling. There's different institutes or organizations who promote storytelling. You can find National Storytelling Network or Northeast Storytellers, and they talk about how to do stories. There's conferences. The South Mountain Community College in Phoenix, Arizona has a storytelling institute where they're doing a lot of application of story. My program that I went to, East Tennessee State University, has a master's in communication and storytelling studies. They've just added an undergrad storytelling track, although they've always had undergrad storytelling classes. Also, you will find in different programs, leadership in story. Harvard and Stanford have programs. So there's a lot of interest. World Bank was one of the first ones who started using storytelling in business, and they have how to do storytelling. There's a lot of information out there, and it didn't used to be.
Just one comment. I'm talking about deep reading. I'm reading a book right now that's pretty interesting. It's called Not the End of the World, and it's by a woman named Hannah. I think it's Hannah Ritchie, but she's worked with she's really a data person, and what she's done is doing environmental work, and she points out that in general semantics fashion is get your facts, check things, test things, because a lot of our assumptions about things are, for instance, like our air quality and the level of pollution is a lot less than it's been in centuries, because when we were burning wood and coal, there was a lot more polluting than is going on now. It could definitely be better, but this is kind of longer range look. She looks at data, so just check it out.
Yeah, come to Western New York.
Well, no, I'm sure your experience is right, but she's talking overall. So just look at the data. That's all she's saying. Is look at the data. Is that there are pathways. There are solutions.
I have looked at the data. That's a pretty big thing to say, right? Yeah, no, I mean, and just to push back very strongly against the idea that, if I heard you right, that we're somehow the world's cleaner now than it was in the past because of the amount of fossil fuels that have been used. I think it's that the data does not support that.
Check it out.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Any other questions? Terry?
This might be a level of analysis directed to Lance. In my head, Kenneth Burke's dramaturgical point of view is George Herbert's need symbolic interactions. But I have a feeling that you're referring to something larger than that in what you just said. I'm not sure if I'm correct. According to what you said.
Yeah, Burke's dramatism, it definitely originates with need and symbolic interaction. But his in his book Rhetoric of Motives, he actually takes. He was familiar with Korzybski and was taking from him and also responding against him at the same time. So he also takes issue with Aristotle. Sorry, Laura. But he also, but in this case, he says, Aristotle's rhetoric is all about this conflict metaphor where you're trying to turn somebody and make them into something else, and that the proper metaphor for rhetoric is identification, where you're trying to come together, like the basis of communication is common, the root meaning. The idea is to try to increase the common ground with the other person. And his metaphors then were courtship, where someone unlike yourself, and both romantic and also in the king's court, of influence, but it's more seductive in that sense. And the other metaphor was prayer, where you're relating to a supreme being totally unlike yourself, but you're trying to come together with this other. So that's, I mean, it's not unrelated to dramatism, but it's a different set of ideas. So he's saying that the goal in rhetoric is identification with the other. And so if I come closer to you, you'll come closer to me in what I'm trying to do. So that's, that's the practical aspect.
I was saying before, in your talk, I forgot to write down if it was Aristotle or Kant, but what I wrote was, I quoted Postman, who always said, the meaning of the communication is the response you get. And now, just now, in connection here, we're talking about intention. And I don't think Mead was talking about intention at all. He was talking about this response.
I didn't say intention.
Well, rhetoric. Didn't you say just now that the level at which in rhetoric the motives, he was talking about doing it for seductive reasons?
Well, yeah, I mean, for Burke, yes, all human communication is intentional.
Right.
Rhetoric,
Yeah.
and he says motive versus motion, right? Inanimate objects have motion, human beings have motives. Now, he's using the word motive in a more ancient sense, though, but that's, yeah. You go.
I should have written it down, but I thought I didn't catch it.
Well, I didn't understand the question. Can you repeat it?
Well, in response to what you were quoting either Kant or Aristotle, and I interpreted it, I said this is exactly what is meant when Postman said the meaning of your communication is the response you get.
Yes, exactly. I think Aristotle will say the same.
And that's
Yes, because when we act, we have or we receive some effects from, in this case, technology or our actions. The same with the communication, of course.
Yeah. And so now I say it's the same thing as rhetoric.
Yes.
So all three things are equal. Yes. Got it. Thanks, guys.
Being non-Aristotelian doesn't mean we hate Aristotle. And we don't hate Taylor Swift either.
Okay. Jim, did you have another question?
Yeah, there's
One more, yeah, one more.
A comment and a question for Gabe, which, I think your project is just amazing. And it seems like it's a necessity in a sense. At least since Descartes, we've been brought up to think that the mind and body were separate, and this was reflected into how informatics was conceived at the very origin. And but I mean, your talk made it quite clear that information cannot really be dissociated from a physical substrate. And so you're picking the vinyl as a pretty good substrate. How far have you thought about what it meant to be able to carry information like for, I don't know, like a long time in the future?
Yeah, I think about it a lot, being a digital artist, right? How long will my artwork last in the first place?
Yeah.
I made a work called the DNA vending machine where I sold human DNA in a vending machine. So we can look into that. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how to bioencode data material into living species. There's a lot of examples of other artists that are working in that same kind of fashion.
So thinking of reproduction as a means to carry on information.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the hardest part is just maintenance with anything. I mean, even with our own human bodies, we have that problem, right? But how do you build something that can be maintained over time and represent data without loss over time? I think it's very, very difficult. And, there's been experiments into like encoding into film strips and physicalization of data. But for me, vinyl records, I mean, obviously the vinyl will decay after time, but with that, I just wanted to make more of a point about how you could physically encode something and how that's actually more valuable in the long run than all the hard drives we have in the world right now, right? Because nobody maintains these hard drives. I mean, I have hard drives from the 90s that I'm like, I don't even know what's on them anymore, right? And it's our lives. Like we're generating more data all the time than we have the possibility to take care of. So there's no custodians. I mean, there are some people that are custodians of data, but it's not really a job quite yet. But maybe it will be in the future. I don't know. But I don't know. Maybe that didn't answer your question exactly.
It's just an open-ended question.
I always think about like there's an artwork by Damien Hirst. You know Damien Hirst, this shark that's in a big vat of liquid floating. It's called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Some Living. And after a while, the shark, it was sold for $12 million, this artwork. After a while, the shark started to decay, started to fall apart. And then people were like, oh no, this is not the same shark anymore. What do we do? And the owner was like, don't replace the shark. It's going to, I'm going to lose value about the shark. But in the end, they replaced it. So I think what happens is that we're really talking conceptually. I think the concept actually outweighs the form in the long run when it comes to digital work. Like documentation of a work is almost just as valuable as the work itself. So finding a way to encode that documentation into something is maybe the answer to all of this.
Just to your point about biology, the single greatest sentence that Neil Postman ever wrote was, children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see.
I was thinking maybe the golden record on Voyager might be a nice precedent too, because not only did this have like, of course, that kind of beautiful distillation of language and diagrams of how we were made up, but also the sonification of Anne Druryon's neural net when she was falling in love with Carl Sagan. So it had that kind of subjectivity, individual experience that was then maybe protected by traveling really fast away from all of life. So it was some kind of thing that reminded me of that.
I think kind of between us too, the idea of decay and what we do with waste, it's been brought up a couple times today, right? Like just how do we take care of the tremendous amount of digital waste that we're creating as well? And that all takes energy also to store. But it's not so sexy to talk about digital waste for some reason. People are much more concerned with physical waste, but these data centers that are controlled, keeping track of millions and millions of terabytes of data generate more energy in some ways than even like landfills are doing now. So, and I always tell people, to me, it's a very interesting fact that like at some point on social media, there will be more deceased profiles than live profiles. And so what does that mean? Like, does it just take over a graveyard in the first place? Anyways, I'm just babbling now. Here, Matt, I'll give you that.
Yes, it is a skeleton for sure.
Oh.
But it's not really a skeleton, it's just a
Yeah.
Representation of skeleton.
It's our future.
On that, I'd like to bring this to a close. You've been an audience, you've been participants talking about an interesting version of user-generated content. You are all brilliant, you are talented, you are doing important work, you're cool, you're fun, this has been great. We hope to see you in Mexico City at the Media College Association in June, and of course next year, although probably in October, we'll do this again here, and you are all welcome and expected to come back. So, Lance, I don't know if you want to give the final word?
I just want to say that we're going to be packing stuff up, so if you want to take any of the free journals or buy any books, go get them now, because we gotta move on out. Thank you all.
Get them while they're hot.
Thank
Get them now.
you so much for your encouragement. I appreciate it.
Thank you.